Okay, Kate, we're streaming.
All right, do we have Savion, Barb? Or am I just not seeing him?
I do not. Oh, here he is. Here he is. Coming
Okay.
in.
All right. All right. Okay, thank you everyone for making that transition, which allows us to have public comment in a somewhat kind of easy manner in this structure, or maybe not easy, but at least it works. So we have 3 topics on the agenda tonight for the operations work group. And I'll get to the approval of the minutes in just one second, but just to give you a preview, we're going to speak to the budget for next year first and have a brief discussion around next steps for referendum planning. And then we have 2 much smaller topics that will both be action items for this coming April board meeting, one of which is a policy change to the threshold for consent, and the other is the Badger Rock contract, which flows through from some of the discussions we've had in that instruction work group over the last couple of months. So I'll kind of lead us through those, and hopefully if I don't see you or get to you, just text me if it isn't seen through Zoom, but I'll be trying to keep an eye on everyone to make sure that we get to every comment. So the first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from March 9th. So I move to approve the minutes from the operations work group meeting dated March 9th, 2020.
A second, Ananda.
Ananda. Anika, your advisory vote?
Aye.
Thanks. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that passes 7-0. So let's dive into the first topic, which Kelly will lead us through. There are going to be 2 moments for pause in here. There's a bit of a long stretch up front on the budget, and that includes some of the strategic equity projects for next year. And then there's a shorter discussion at the end on next steps for referendum planning. So if you have questions, if you can just hold them and note them down, and then we'll pause kind of 2/3 of the way through for questions. With that, Kelly, do you want to take over?
All right, Barbara, are you going to be sharing the PowerPoint here? Or am I to
You
pull it
are
up?
a bit quiet for me. I don't know about for everyone else, but.
Okay, I just want to make sure Barb can pull
Kelly,
up
I
the
made
PowerPoint
you a
here.
co-host so you can share too. So unless you want me to do that.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and pull it up, Barb?
Okay.
So while Barb's doing that, we can go ahead and get it kicked off. So as Kate mentioned, we are in the April Operation Work Group. And the goal for the April Operation Work Group as it relates to the budget process is to close out any open items from our conversations. As a reminder, we started this budget process back in November. And our goal is to release a draft budget by the end of this month for community feedback so that the board is prepared to vote by June. However, we all know that we're living in kind of a different environment than we were together just a month ago when we were face-to-face in the March Operation Work Group. A lot has changed in the world and in the environment around us. So we'll go ahead and note that as we go along in our discussions to make sure we highlight those areas which may create some need for additional flexibility as we move forward. And as Kate mentioned, kind of wrap up the budget conversation discussing the referendum. But we'll focus on what we'll call our base budget moving forward, or otherwise previously called our non-passing version of the budget. So we make sure that we have what we need in place for July 1 in order to continue the operations of the school district. So we'll go ahead, Barbara, if you could click on through to the educational equity policy. We always want to start our conversation by putting the educational equity policy in play in the room. And that's because as a board and as a district, we've committed to our equity lens and our equity discussions. And potentially now, even more than ever, it's important to be really paying attention to the decisions we make, who's benefiting from those decisions, and how we best support our students who need it the most. The other thing that's really important that we keep in the room, again, probably more than ever, is our strategic framework and the goals that the board put forward. So Barb, if you go to the strategic framework slides real quick, we always want to make sure that we're keeping these goals in place as we're starting to make investments with our limited resources, making sure we're investing in those things that are the highest leverage possible. Now our timeline on the next slide here, as I mentioned, is typically in April we release our draft budget so that we get feedback from the community in May and so that the board can vote in June. We've been working on this budget since November, and we've been working on a set of assumptions. The primary set of assumptions that we've been working on since January is based in the state approved biennium budget, which is our revenue. And that starts where we are. And so we'll talk about those assumptions as we get deeper into the presentation and the effects that those might have. But this is a time for us to make sure that we are all still really grounded in the work that we've done thus far in the budget. So the slide in front of you right now is the budget goals that we set forward in January. I usually fly through these pretty quick, but I want to make sure everybody kind of pauses and reads through them to make sure they remain our budgeting goals as we move forward in our current environment. When I read them, I think there's still good goals for us to be working for, and I don't see any adjustments that are needed to these budget goals. But I want to make sure that that's where the board is as well. So go ahead and take that in. As Kate said, I'm going to charge through a handful of slides here. But if there's anything that you're starting to question on these goals, tonight would be the time to bring that up. Similarly, Barb, if you go to the next slide on the budget parameter or principles, these are the parameters of which we work through in our budgeting work. Now more than ever is the time for the third bullet here for us to be looking at this commitment to a multi-year long-range perspective. We not only have to really focus on this year and how this year is going to play out, we'll be paying close attention to our revenue and our expenses. And we may have to be looking at what our fund balance looks like by the time we hit June. So it's going to be really important that we not only look at a multi-year perspective going forward, but we'll have to be looking at the impact that this year will now play out in the following years. Previous to this month, that wouldn't have been as much of a concern of mine, but now we'll have to be working in multiple years at the same time as we go forward in the budget. So be paying attention to that. And then of course, the first bullet is we had been under kind of this discussion of creating two budgets all the way back from September. As we wrap up the end of this presentation, one of the pieces of feedback I will need from you by the end of the conversation is this idea of kind of putting forward to the community a passing budget at the end of the month. I'm potentially thinking that it may make sense for us to evaluate our scope and release that passing budget when we have more of an idea of the scope. So I just want to put that into the room for thinking now and just circle back to it by the time we get to the end of the conversation. Kate, that's feedback we'll need to make sure we get into the room. So Barbara, if you could go on to the next slide. So you've seen this slide now, multiple times since November and December. As I mentioned, for the rest of this part of the conversation, I'm going to really be focusing on the does not pass version of the budget, because that's what we need to have in place as a board now and by the end of June in order to make sure the district continues to operate and really serve students and families. So you're going to see me in this zone moving forward to make sure that all open items are closed out at this time. So in the next slide, we've talked through all of our assumptions and what I'm going to call the base budget moving forward. And this is based on a revenue forecast of a revenue limit per pupil increase, which would generate, and our special education 30%, which would generate about $7.6 million in revenue. For now, I think that is still a good working assumption to launch our budget and work from. However, it's going to remain very important that we're flexible with each other and open communication, because there is now a lot of unknowns, and particularly unknowns as it relates to the state and anything the state might need to do to balance their own budget moving into next year. So we'll have to keep our eye on what a state repair bill might look like and what kind of impacts they might have on the school system. We've already seen some kind of hints to that future coming out of our legislature and some of the news that came out last week. So we're just going to have to keep an eye on it. There's too many unknowns right now that will continue to work on the budget that is passed from the legislature, because that's what we know to be facts to date. But if any new facts come forward, we'll have to be flexible with that. And that flexibility will then continue to rely on any of the other flexibilities and our ongoing assumptions, which are in our expenditures below on this chart. But at this point in the budget that we anticipate releasing at the end of April, we have steps and lanes and base wage baked in. We've already taken a reduction of $3 million, $1 million to central office in staffing positions, and $2 million at the school level in staffing positions. At this time of year, that's pretty much as far as we can go because contracts are starting to go out already for the next school year. All right, so we need to keep that in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is that you already voted on the healthcare plans as well. And those are being enacted by our HR department for implementation on July 1 as ready as well. So we pretty much use that lever that's available to us as well at this point in time. So that leaves open for discussion for today. A couple open items on the strategic equity projects, questions that you board members have had and asked us to bring back to you for today's conversation, and closing out the list of required allowances, kind of a last open item. So that's where we are in our budgeting process, kind of agreeing that we all will need to remain flexible with each other through June and potentially into October. So moving on to the next slide, Barb, then, is looking at those lists of required allowances and making sure there's no open questions to this particular list. As a reminder, what budgetary required allowances are, it's those things that we really have to fund either because state law requires it or because the board has previously approved a plan or an action that's tied to a budgetary amount and one of our multi-year commitments. So in our base budget, we're looking at $2.3 million in required allowances. That's pretty typical. We have about $2 million a year. And it's really important to know what makes up the majority of that, right? So our 2X independent charter school kind of payments that we put out to our charter schools that are non-MMSD schools, our estimate is about $700,000 this year. As a reminder, we have a new third independent charter school launching for next year. So those are new student enrollments that we're really budgeting for and planning for next year. In addition to that, we're looking to reserve about $500,000 in increased expenditures from the state's program, the open enrollment program. It's very important to note that this $500,000 is not driven by new students open enrolling out of the school district. As a matter of fact, we've turned that trend around, and for the last 2 years, we've really had pretty much a net neutral kind of in and out. And that's what we expect to happen again next year. The increased expenses is due to the state's passing of a 5% rate increase in the biennium budget. As a reminder, our own revenue limits are only going up by 2%. But when open enrollment percentage increases exceeding that amount, we have to budget for it because that will be an increased expenditure. The other amounts in here are largely tied to the cost of kind of inflation going up. We always have to budget for things like background checks and IT systems that go up at an agreed to rate in our contracts. Workers' comp, property, liability tend to go up in alignment with inflation. In addition to that, we have some grants that ended that we've been planning for that support students and programs. These are kind of a number of smaller grants that accumulate together for something we need to make sure we fund to support the programs going forward. And then on the technology plan, we really have some kind of good work to announce. In the original passing of the board's plan, we would have needed $625,000 in this year to fund the tech plan. Last year, we got that down to $525,000. And this year, our team's been working hard to make sure we, in this budget with limited resources, we've moved some funds around, we've made some good decisions. And at this point, we're asking for $125,000, a $400,000 reduction from the original plan in order to keep the last schools launched in the tech plan. And What we know in today's environment is those last 6 schools have been some of our hardest to get up and running on virtual learning because they haven't yet been kind of trained in the one-to-one world. And these are the devices that we've had to find and make up. So it's probably more important now than ever that we get some of that launched off the ground. In the future, as we do pull together what might be a passing budget, there's just 2 things I want to foreshadow for the future. The first is that we would like to bring back a discussion as it relates to our special education transition program. Some board members might remember that in June that was cut out of the budget through a board amendment, and we had to move it on to IDEA one-time funding in order to get some of that work done for our students and our staff. We'd like to revisit that conversation if we get back to that passing budget discussion. Another item we'd like to revisit in the future if we get back to that passing budget conversation is increasing our maintenance budget. The board made a commitment a couple of years ago to move that $5 million closer towards the $8 million budget that we truly believe is needed to continue maintenance. And the idea had always been, as the technology plan increased, that we would be able to kind of increase the maintenance budget to get where we needed. So if we get to a spot where we might be able to do that for next year, that would be a high leverage item for us. So just something for the back of your mind for now. Barb, if you could flip forward a slide for me, that'd be great. So moving on then, the other big open item for us to close discussion on today really developed from the healthcare vote that you all took last month. So when you made the changes to the healthcare plan, the whole package itself allowed us to open up $1 million of revenue authority in the overall budget. So the board has some decisions with this particular funding. The first decision is you could decide not to commit funding at all to this money at this time. We could put it in a reserve line item and make decisions with this money. The closer we get to June, the more information we have from the broader environment. We will have more information from the feds and the state regarding our current budget this year. And then we would presumably have more money from or more information from the state about what our revenue might look like for the 2021 year and any state budget repair bills that might come forward in the next month or so. So that is one option, is just to decide to hold it and do it and make investments later on with it. The board could also decide to make some decisions tonight into strategic equity plans and projects, and to hold some of it, or you could decide to commit all of it tonight. So there's a gradient of your decisions available to us tonight. And what I'm gonna do is just quickly go through those strategic equity project ideas that you all have put forward for us. I'm gonna get to the end of these slides, and then I'm gonna ask some of our experts to come forward for the overall conversation. So Barbara, if you could flip to the next slide for me. So the open topics that I think this board has put forward over the last 2 months, one is on behavioral health in schools. We have met our commitments to our expansion plan for this year already, and launching 3 schools have been completely funded. This board has asked if there's potential to do more. So in a minute, I will bring up Armando to talk about that, but anything we might do more in BHS would draw down that $1 million that I just mentioned. In the next slide, Barb, we have our micro schools. The board had a very good conversation back in the instruction work group in March, which made it kind of clear to me that the board might want to do something in this area. As it relates to micro schools, after talking with Paris, and I'll bring Paris up in a minute, one of the main things that would be helpful for that program is to move the $250,000 from the TID, which is a one-time funding source that was designed to be innovative work to decide if the pilot really worked out and got in the direction the board wanted to head in. If at this time the board was comfortable, one idea would be to move the $250,000 onto local resources, which are reoccurring and therefore stable for this budget and for this team. That would free up TID money, which we could make other decisions with. So we'll bring up Paris to talk about that in a minute, but that is an option for that $1 million as well. And then the third item on the next slide, Barb, that we talked about, or we've heard the board talk about, is on the safety and security assistance job realignment work. The team has done some very good work to assess the job description and where the pay might be and what we need out of the contract year. Putting forward $160,000 proposal to you in last March. In that budget, however, we had built it into the passing kind of budget only, and kind of considering where we are, I'm hearing questions from staff about if we can get this into the non-passing budget so staff know what to expect as of July 1 versus waiting for November. I know that's resonated with me, and I think it's probably resonated with you. So if the board wants to do this, we kind of as a team fully understand why that would be a decision that we might want to do, especially considering where we are today. So those are kind of the 3 strategic equity projects that I think this board has asked to move forward. But now, in this discussion would be that idea. Nikki, I just got a couple more slides before I open it up. Barb, if you could move to the next slide real quick. So just to kind of tick through the other open items, and then we'll open it up for the big conversation. We always talk about our TID 25 plan at this time of year. And the board put forward the TID 25 plan back in 2016. We've largely remained tied to that plan to draw down the $9 million in resources. This is our last year of TID 25 funding, just over $1 million left that we would draw down and spend. Built into that plan for this year that we would like to remain committed to is $350,000 out of that last one-time money for fund the tech infrastructure work of the district. What I will say on this is thank God this board made that commitment in the last 3 years to build up our tech infrastructure. For those who are on the board, you would remember our websites crashing, our phone system crashing, parents not being able to call into the schools. Chad Weezy's team has done an amazing job with the resources available out of this fund to get us stable. And I think where we are today in supporting students and staff is a real estimate and testament to the work that they've done. So this is the last amount to get that last bit of work done. Our 3rd year of the teacher team development and assessment work is in this plan. This work is well on its way and just about done. And then in addition to those things, we have a couple projects this year that did not fully expend their budget that would roll over into next year. One is the planning for full day 4K, which we entirely plan on utilizing and bringing back to the board in August. So that money is available to our team for planning on full day 4K in next year's budget. As I mentioned, the $250,000 for the micro school, this is rollover money. If the board put micro schools on local, that would free up $250,000, which could go to full day 4K planning or maintenance or other priorities of the board. And then there was a project under my department, which was aligned to re-envisioning how we staff high schools in particular, and working with an outside firm to do that work. We put that work on hold at the beginning of the school year, kind of waiting for a permanent superintendent who we knew we would want to have a lot of input into that work. So at this point, we hope to carry that over so we could do that work going forward into next school year. And kind of last but not least, in the overall open items of this budget, Barb, if you could go to the next slide for me. We always go through and look at all of our fines and fees across the district every year, making sure everything is budgeted and balanced as we need to. And at this point, there's only a couple small items that we really think we need to adjust that would be built into the budget book. One is on locker locks. We're across the board and what we charge families, different rates, different schools. Different schools are charging every year. Some schools are only charging in 6th grade, and it's just time to clean that up. So what we're doing is $6 across the board for all, if you're buying a lock, and it gets charged once at 6th grade and kind of once in your 9th grade high school. If you lose one, you then get to pay for a new one. But we're going to mandate that across the district for equity and consistency's sake. Our yearbook, we've started to lose money because we haven't been increasing yearbook along with inflation and just other printing costs. So a $3 increase to the cost of purchasing a yearbook is what we're going to need to make sure we're not losing money on yearbooks year after year. And then finally on food prices, The DPI does mandate what they call an equity calculation to make sure that we're charging full paying families the accurate cost so that we're not subsidizing food prices with local 10 funding. It's built into the law and the requirements. So we do have to increase food prices this year. We're recommending a 20-cent increase at breakfast and 20-cent increase at lunch. Again, this is only for full paying families. Reduced prices would stay the exact same, would not change. And of course, free prices remain free. So largely this is an equity investment and an equity tool to make sure that our of-income families are really paying kind of their fair share of the food prices. So that's what we have as far as open items in the budget. And last but not least, we'll close this out by making sure we have talked about the full budget, Barb, in the next slide, all together, of what this would mean for the taxpayer. So some important things to take away from this slide and what we're calling our base budget, which would be implemented on July 1. We're looking at a 2.8% total levy increase, which is a reduction in our overall mill rate down to $10.87. If you look at the graph to the left, it's very important to recognize what makes up that 2.8%. So we have made some very difficult decisions and made some severe cuts in the budget for this year that we need to, really make sure we're aware of the impact it already has to the district. What you'll see is only $1.2 million is actually our local budget increase. Very, very small because of the reductions that we've made. The majority of our levy increase is tied to factors largely outside of our control. So we are estimating an equalization aid loss. That's what the state gives us in funding. Another reduction of 15%. So $5.5 million of our total tax levy increase is due from the switch between state funding to local funding, a continuation of the complete opposite of our 2/3 funding at the state level. You'll also see $2.7 million is due to the payments due for the 2X charters and our private school vouchers. Again, two programs largely outside of our control that we pass on those costs to the local taxpayer. But they are largely not resources going to Madison metropolitan students. So it's just really important to understand the effect that these state programs have on what you all are asked to move forward to the property tax owners on behalf of the state programs. So just want to make sure that that's kind of understood. But Kate, that's what I really have as far as open questions. The next slide is some next steps, but I'd kind of like to come back to that, I think, after. I'll cover it now. I'm sorry, go ahead, Barb, to the next slide. I'll just cover it now. So I've already mentioned April board meeting will release our draft budget book. There will be some early voting items. For one, we meant to bring welcoming schools to you last month. It was missed in the overall motion. So that was a mistake on our part that will come back to you in April. If the board wants to make any movement on BHS, that would be something that would have to come to you in April, or we won't be able to get it launched in time for the start of the school year. And as we look forward to May and June, those are our times for public input. Now, public input will look a little different because of the environment that we're in. We will continue to have public speakers, just like we do with any of our other board meetings via this format, presumably. But we will also use the superintendent's advisory group feedback as we always do. But what we're going to do instead of launching a big survey, which is just not kind of the right time, and we got a lot of surveys in the field right now, is we have thousands of pages of notes from all the referendum sessions and various other feedbacks that we've done over the last year. We're going to use the research team to go back, look at all those notes, and pull the feedback that's really based on the budget out and pull the themes specific to next year's budget out as a way of helping to put lens on it. So we'll take a couple different ways of looking at community feedback this year than we might in the past because of kind of where we are situated right now. And then of course, set up June for the board vote. Looking for probably the May timeframe to go into closed session to start talking about the timeline for bargaining on base wage. All right, Kate. You want to kind of lead where you want to start?
Yep. So Kelly, just to kind of focus this discussion, you're looking for our feedback, particularly on the 3 strategic equity projects that you've just summarized: micro schools, BHS, and security assistant role and pay package.
Yep, correct.
And any other questions or comments on the base budget moving into next year?
Yep, want to make sure all kind of questions are out, and if they can't be answered tonight, that we get them answered by the end of the month.
Okay. Nikki. You're on mute. Yep.
One, I just want to say, my opinion is that we need to fund our security assistants. I think they have done an excellent job, and I don't want workers not knowing where their next meal is going to come from because they don't know what job is going to be there or not. I think they need some stability. The other is an actual question. In the COVID bill, in the federal one, Betsy DeVos, it was put in there that IDEA could be suspended for up to 1 year within a 30-day notice. Are we planning to do that? Please say no.
So Lisa, are you on? I'm not sure if Lisa's on. So Nikki, that's really a question as far as services that is much better for our special education team.
Okay.
We are evaluating the uses of IDA funding itself in our current environment. There are some flexibilities that have been provided for how we can use IDA in the environment of which we're in, and we're evaluating that. It may need to use some of that funding to make sure that our special education students have the resources they need right now, and that would look a little different because of our environment. But as far as the instructional kind of aspect of implementing services to students and using the IDA to do that, that's really a Lisa question.
Lisa.
Hi, Nikki. We have not had any conversations about that. We are continuing to support students as best as we can in the virtual environment. John actually has his own COVID website set up for families with children that have disabilities. We don't have any plans to do anything drastic with that.
Thank you. I had a little bit of a panic there.
Thanks, Nikki. Other questions? Chris.
First of all, Kelly, I want to thank you for all of your work on this. We're in a really challenging, uncertain budget scenario right now, and I just really appreciate the effort you've put into trying to present very concrete plans to us in a difficult time. So thank you. I believe that the $1 million in savings that we have from the changes in our health insurance plan should be reinvested into our staff. That savings is because our staff is paying more into their health insurance. That said, I think we should move forward with the strategic equity investment in our safety and security staff. That would fit that bill. And then I would strongly support putting the remainder of the $1 million into reserve in the hope that we can use it to try to stabilize cost of living adjustments in whatever happens over the summer and in the spring with the state budget situation, especially if there's some kind of a budget repair bill. When it comes to the technology plan, I do have a question, and this could be regarding either local funding or TID 25, but given the challenges we've had with the 4,000 or so students in the district who don't have internet access, I'm wondering if we could build into the budget some way of ensuring that we do take an equity focus with technology spending next year, especially if we see multiple waves of COVID and we have to go back to online learning at some point. Would we be able to earmark or possibly earmark some of the technology money for things like hotspots for students who don't have any other way to access the internet? I would like to make sure that technology spending going forward is done to try to help to level the playing field for all students who may not have internet access at home.
Yeah, Chris, we have had a team actively working on that right now. One of the challenges with hotspots is not necessarily even the funding, it's the availability of them at all. Not that much different than toilet paper or hand sanitizer. It's very hard to get your hand on a hotspot right now. But we have teams working on that. Yes, there, especially if some of the TID 25 money were to free up, kind of by movement on the micro school front, it could be set aside to doing that. But our teams right now are working on the funding that we have available for this year, and use it and trying to figure out how to use some of our title resources. And this is maybe where some IDA help might come into play as well, to identify solutions. I don't know if Chad or Lisa want to jump in, who are actively working on that. But I just want to kind of give you some confidence that we are actively working on it, and we're working on kind of a plan A, B, and C, to do kind of multiple options. And we do understand that we're probably not only planning for now, but potentially for a summer kind of school setting, and that this could come back. You know, sometime later in the year, we're ending up next year, ending up back in this environment. So we are planning for kind of long-term ideas as much as we're also planning for short-term ideas. But we also need to recognize that our city partnerships really need to come into play here. As far as solving the Wi-Fi access solution in the long run, this is where the city and the school district collaboration and maybe our committee could really double down on getting broadband access to low-income neighborhoods. Largely, that's the infrastructure this city is missing, that has us in the situation that we're in today.
Jane, do you want to jump in here?
I do. I just want to add here that we're in weekly meetings with the city, the county, the university, as well as other large districts. And this is really a significant issue for everybody. So, you know, we may be able to do hotspot as solutions for some of these problems, but they're not long lasting. And so I think it's on everybody's radar screen that we really need to look at this as a community to figure out how to bring this service to all of our neighborhoods. So it's on everybody's radar screen, really.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. That I think is probably the most important thing to focus on with the technology plan going into the coming school year and the summer.
Could you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, just
I
fine.
looked down and
Going into TID 25, I was just wondering, Kelly or somebody, if you could give us a more concrete sense of what a $20,000 investment in 4K piloting or planning looks like what can we accomplish with $20,000?
Yeah, the budgets that I've seen, and Lisa can jump in and add more, it's largely tied to purchasing materials. So to move to a full day environment means our classroom, a pilot classroom might need to look a little different, might need a little more classroom, 4K classrooms, and the materials themselves we would need to be purchasing and expanding. So the idea when we originally did put the money in the TID over a year ago was that if we were to launch a pilot, we would need to be making the purchases as early as kind of March and April. For staff training over the summer. And so it was basically supplies, materials, and then PD for those 4K teachers in the summer before a launch.
And if we were to, at some point, decide that we wanted to increase the amount of funding for the 4K pilot, what would the increased funding be going towards? Just more supplies for more schools or something else?
Yeah, at like much higher dollar amounts, you're talking about funding positions at that point. So as a reminder, the state does not fund full day 4K. The state only funds a 0.6 position. So if you moved to a full day, you're essentially short a 0.4 person. So if you were to use TID resources, it'd kind of be like the micro school example, where you used one-time resources, like as a pilot project, for a future board or a future year to decide to move it on to local if that's the pilot the district planned on continuing.
And in relation to that, given that we haven't at this point voted on an operating referendum, is it realistic to think we would be able to go forward with full day 4K if we end up not doing an operating referendum?
Probably not. Yeah, if we end up in a scenario where we don't have any extra resources and the 21-22 budget is even worse than this year, which would be the environment we're in without anything changing, it would be very hard. The board could always make difficult decisions to make extra funding available, and that would be on the board, but it would be much more difficult to do without any new incoming revenue.
Okay, just a quick question about the outreach part of this plan. We haven't had a ton of participation yet in the online comments periods for board meetings. I'm hoping that's just because the word needs to get out about how to do it. But I'm wondering if, in lieu of doing a survey, which I understand why you guys don't want to sift through more survey data, we could actually go back to the old days when we used to do separate budget forums and maybe do a Zoom budget forum where the community could just log into Zoom at a budget forum and talk to us about their feedback on the budget. That might be another way to garner input that wasn't necessarily tied to a board meeting time. And so I would just put that out there. I think as much input as we can get is good. And given the challenges of getting input in a situation where it's technology dependent, I would like to see us provide as many opportunities as possible for people to give us feedback, both over Zoom, and we might also want to think about ways for people who don't necessarily have Zoom to still be able to make sure it's really clear how to email us their feedback, so technology doesn't keep people from talking to us about what they're seeing in the budget. And then my final question is, up until a month ago, we felt pretty comfortable with having a passing and a non-passing budget. And that pretty much seemed like with those two budgets, we could capture the possible variables going into the fall. And it seems like that's all out the window right now with COVID. There are so many uncertainties right now. We don't know what's going to happen with the operating referendum. We don't know how many waves there will be to coronavirus. We don't know if there's going to be a budget repair bill. What does it look like going into the June vote and then into the October vote with that kind of uncertainty? How might this process look different this year for this board?
So I don't know that the process at its kind of key milestone steps looks any different. I think the communication kind of amongst us all will need to remain even kind of more open than usual. So for example, in July, in August, we tend to usually go underground with the budget. It's outvoted on in June. I spend my time implementing the budget, frankly, in July and August, and don't kind of come back up to talk about the budget until September and October. We might not be able to afford to do that this year, right? We just might need to be able to talk more as things might be changing on us in July and August. But we'll just have to take the information as it comes and continue to update the board and each other. For me, that's what's most important, and kind of the environment that's probably mostly different is we just might need to be more flexible than we're used to.
That's all my questions. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris. Ananda, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly, for walking us through and reminding us of decisions that we have made and conversations we had in the past. It's really helpful to have the slide deck. I will say that I feel like I've been consistent with this message since COVID-19 hit the US, and in Wisconsin in particular. I'm very concerned about where we are going to be financially, so I'm going to echo the sentiments of my other colleagues. I do think that, amid all the uncertainties that are going to have in regards to the state budget, in regards to waivers, in regards to, financial relief, one thing is certain: we know who are the people that are going to be most impacted by this. And it will be our Black students and our Black students with IEPs. So, and our students with IEPs in general, right? So we really need to center ourselves to really not just to really understand that the extent of the impact on those students and those families, but also where is the creativity to address that, right? So we were already coming from a pretty deficit place before. We are already in pretty high disparities in regards to providing educational services for those students. We are going to potentially, we are certain that we're going to hit a climax with the pandemic. So so to expand into like your third or fourth slide, Kelly, around the goals, I think that has become even a greater goal for me, is like where are we going to be looking for creative ways to really be able to address an even greater gap and either greater deficit than we have experienced in the past. So that's one thing I would say. And in regards to everything else around the budget, my recommendation to be as conservative as possible, delay as much as possible every decision that we make. I am in full support of, I agree with Nikki's word around making sure that our security staff, they've been waiting for a long time for us to make this decision. I hate to have them wait any longer. It's specifically around this time, given that they will be, a group of our staff that is being significantly impacted by this. So I would prioritize their salary adjustments. And I am in full support of all day 4K. However, I am unclear of what education is going to look like in the next 3 months. So it's hard for me to make a informed decision to, yes, let's fund 4K, 4K, all day 4K, without knowing exactly what even that could look like, right? I do not want to, like 3 months from now, we are like need to put iPads on for 4-year-olds because we haven't figured out how to do this in a way that is strategically. So those are the two things I want to say. And thank you so much, Kelly, and your team for putting this together and to really thinking through this and to have your fingers on the pulse around what's happening at the state level, and be worried for us, right? Like I think for the most part, that's your main job, and you're doing that, and it's showing us. So thank you very much. Thank you, Kate.
Okay.
Ali, you want to take the floor?
Yeah, so really specifically around the security assistant, I was wondering, Kelly, if you could speak to some of the exact changes. So we had talked about kind of the length of their contract, the fact that they're not paid during holiday breaks, to what extent that'll be reconciled, and what that looks like across the district, please.
Yeah, so if Leah and Heidi, if you could have your video and join me here. So Leah has been working very closely with the safety and security assistants around this plan. So we'll have Leah talk through the plan in more details and kind of the reasons behind them. And then Heidi, of course, being on our HR team and closely with the handbook, can answer the question about kind of how our contracts are set up, such that not only safety security assistants, kind of anyone in that role doesn't have that paid vacation, and how that's built in and why it works that way. Leah, do you want to go?
Yeah, I'll take the first piece more around conceptually what this proposal is recommending and why. And then I think Heidi will be able to talk about those sort of the days of pay and how all of those work. So generally speaking, we have taken a 3-prong approach to our SSA strategy. And this is a 3-prong approach in a phase 1. So we are very clearly recognizing that this is a multi-step process in order to fully capitalize on the outstanding skill and resource that exists within this school security assistant group. So step 1 was an analysis of the current job description and ensuring that their pay is commensurate with the work that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. As a result of that review, we learned 2 things. One, as an SSA group, there are some minor adjustments that were necessary to make to the job description or in order to truly align the work that the SSAs are doing every day with what is written on paper. So we have begun that process of alignment. There are not any major changes or additional duties, but simply what are SSAs doing and how does that play out and how do we make sure that that's adequately represented? So that was part of our work. Then from there, it's taking a look at that job description and the work that they are doing and ensuring that the pay is commensurate with their responsibility. As you all have indicated, and we agree, we do not believe that that pay was commensurate with the skill level that they have and the duties they perform. And so at this time, we are recommending a 10% increase in pay across the unit. So those who are coming in at a $16 an hour, $16.63 would be making $18.29 as a starting salary. I say salary, it is actually an hourly wage. I just sometimes mix my words together. The second piece of the work is really about our investment in our school security assistants. Part of that investment is ensuring that we have adequate time for our school security assistants to engage in both professional development and professional collaboration. What we are hearing from that group and the opportunities we've had with them over the last 3 weeks as we engage in online virtual professional development with the SSA group is that they have an incredible amount of skill and deep knowledge and incredible disposition for this work. And they need our time, our resources, and our energy, our undivided attention and energy put towards them in order to ensure that we are investing in professional development. So we are recommending at this time an increase of 5 days for professional learning to happen in the summer. And this could be either school-based or at a district level. That's work scoping that out that we will do with our principals if and when these days become available to us. I will share that there has been consideration for days beyond just 5, and those are conversations that we are continuing to have as we think about our next phase. There is a healthy tension that we have here where we have to allow our SSAs enough time in order for them to change their summer schedules in order to accommodate more days of work. So as we think about their work, many of them take second jobs in the summer. So we just have to work to make sure that we're balancing what we're asking of them and what they can do and making sure they have time to make those decisions. And then lastly, our final strategy is really about SSA leadership. And again, this is a phase 1 of a multi-phase process. But in our high schools, we have 4 or 5 SSAs and 4 or 5 principals. It is incredibly difficult for there to be good opportunities for leadership and cohesion across school and across the district. In addition, some of our SSAs are some of the most brilliant individuals that we have in our district, and capitalizing on their leadership is important. So similar to a department chair, we're recommending a 7% stipend, for lack of a better word. Heidi, you can correct me if there's actually a better term, but a 7% stipend on their base hourly wage to serve in a lead role, really for the purpose of coordinating with their assistant principal and their security team and coordinating with the district. And again, that is the beginning of a leadership track available for our SSAs. So that is the general thinking and the rationale. And again, I can't reinforce enough that this is a step 1 in a multi-step process. And then Heidi, do you want to address the how we pay them and when they are paid and those gaps potentially?
Sure. So an SSA is similar to any other hourly employee. They're paid for the hours they work when they work them. So they're currently paid on a bi-weekly basis. So when we do have break periods when they do not work, they don't get paid because they're not working. That's the same for our food service workers, the SEAs, everyone in the EA group, even the clerical. Some clerical do have vacation that they can then substitute, others do not. There are ways for people who are in an hourly situation to make adjustments in their pay for that. we've had these conversations with the various groups over time that we allow staff to put their money that they make in as many accounts as they want. So to manage their own money, we can work with them to determine what they would want to basically take out of each paycheck and put into a separate account to, you know, so they don't use it all at once per se, but to make up for that, to take into account, you know, basically winter break and spring break, because those are the 2 periods of time where they're not working.
Yeah, so that's a very typical process for school districts and contracts to operate under. I've worked with many school districts at this point. And because of our school year kind of like function, that's typically how school districts work for anyone who's not really yearly employees.
Thank you so much for speaking to that and getting into kind of the specifics in terms of costs and reassignment or alignment of the role. I appreciate that some of this is just kind of the normal way in which we interact with certain categories of employees, and simultaneously, I think paid vacation, especially given our current circumstance, is something, you know, people rely on. And I think that in combination with paid sick time. I have a question that isn't around security in terms of equity, but my follow-up question, I think for you, Leah, is you said we have 5 security guards at every high school. We have 4 at every high school. So I guess
typically 4, yes.
Given the range of the sizes of our high schools, what determines how many security assistants we have?
That's a great question, Ali. My answer would be conjecture. Kelly actually might have some institutional knowledge here from before, but generally speaking, right now, it appears to be a blanket 4 people per high school. We have staffed with an LTE at times, schools, when they have significant or emerging needs. So we have some subs essentially available. So for example, one of our schools right now is running at 5 SSAs as there was a transition that happened and that we kept that person on for a period of time. So generally 4 is just across the board, but it's certainly not a conversation that we have had in the last year about how that decision is made.
Can I follow up and ask, you said we have 5 at one school. Is the school with 5 the largest high school? Is it West?
Currently it is West, yes.
Okay.
But I just want to re-emphasize Leah's point. They're assigned based on need. It is not always the largest school that has the largest need. We tend to have high schools that, for various reasons, can kind of flare up and down throughout the years. And so the work that we did 2 or 3 years ago, probably now, was make it everyone kind of, some had 5, some had 4, and we had no flexibility to move SSAs around back then. You had what you had. It was like a teacher, you didn't move. And what we did is we moved it to 4 and then made these others kind of able to move with where the need is. And those individuals were picked very intently to be people who were kind of flexible and versatile. And I believe it's been working a lot better to be more flexible with the actual need throughout the community.
And we also now maintain a pool of substitutes, which is not something that we have done in the past. So we're creating a pipeline of SSAs who are both substitutes, but are also deeply engaged in our professional learning, so that as vacancies emerge, we can move them in. So we're able to be a little bit more nimble than just who's assigned specifically where.
Thank you so much for speaking to that portion of the question. The other thing I think is really complicated about this conversation is that we are talking about what we're going to do in terms of safety when we talk about SSAs. And we're in a really interesting point right now in terms of what is public health and safety, and it looking really differently than it has before. And so I think that's something to lean into in terms of what this decision looks like ultimately. I am in agreement with the idea of moving the micro school off of TID, I'm sorry, is it TID 25? TID 25 funding, and having that be embedded in a way that allows for the long-term growth of that work. So thank you so much for hearing us on that, Kelly, and emphasizing that within the presentation.
Paris is on the line in case anybody has questions. I just want to make sure you know he is available. I don't know if you do, just want to make sure you know.
Thank you for being available, Paris, and thanks for the work you're doing. And I'm excited to see that work be, given a more sustainable opportunity. In terms of the 1 million in savings, I think I want to echo a lot of what Chris and Ananda said in terms of, I think, making kind of decisions that allow for us to be consistent with past messaging while also really trying to reserve funding for the unknown, which seems to be ever expanding at this point. My last question was specific to looking at the increase to 8 million in maintenance at this time. I'm wondering if that's in both the passing budget and the non-passing budget, what we're looking at in terms of just kind of greater clarity around that.
Yeah, sorry, I probably went through that a little too fast. So our base budget, which is the non-passing budget for July 1, does not have any increases to the overall maintenance budget. There'll be a one-time increase from the leftover of the TID resources for Holtzman. You might remember that conversation earlier in the year, but no increase to the reoccurring maintenance budget. The goal is to get to $8 million, but we've not been able to increase their budget in this non-passing budget. Well, I brought it up as a kind of a note that it's not in here, and something that I'm hoping we can kind of keep our eyes on between now and October, and potentially either fit it into this base budget or fit it into what may be a passing version of the budget later on. So I brought it up as something to watch, but it is not in there right now.
Yeah, I think my last comment was around full day 4K and our ability to provide full day 4K and what that looks like in terms of flexibility around mixed age classrooms, and our ability to expand early childhood learning or provide daycare. Is there kind of more than one way for us to get at full day 4K, and do we have flexibility in terms of how we can do it?
I think that we have our early learning team scheduled to come to the board during an instructional work group in actually August or September to do some initial thinking and planning. We've never really actually fully discussed that with the board outside of when it's brought up as an strategic equity project. And I think there are all kinds of things to consider, and it deserves a longer conversation.
Thanks, Sally. Savion, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, so thank you for the whole team for the thorough work and presentation through this these really uncertain times. I just wanted to offer a few comments on the SSA. Really thrilled that we're able to provide a level of pay and actual in reflection to the actual duties that our most diverse segment of our workforce does, and actually reflect their actual duties and their job description, like forming really important relationships with students. I have heard stories of SSAs giving, rides to school from school, and, providing meals throughout the hallway and throughout the day. For next steps, really looking to build leadership pipelines for SSAs and more concrete opportunities for SSAs to be general education teachers as well. Really excited that we're able to look into expanding behavioral health in schools in a significant way. And on the $1 million, just want to echo points that everyone has made so far. I think that we can provide a level of, compensation to our current teachers and staff, but also reserving a significant portion of that money to fund balance, because we are in such a uncertain budget situation right now. I guess looking forward to more discussion on all-day 4K and what that can look like for enrollment next February, given depending on where we're at.
Thanks, Savion. I'm going to jump in. Kelly, can you speak a little bit? You spoke earlier in the discussion around fund balance, and can you just speak a little bit to how this current operating environment is impacting our expenditures for this year, and what type of flexibility we might need from a fund balance perspective, just to deal with the current moment, not even necessarily next year?
Yeah, I mean, I'll touch on it as it relates to next year, mostly because I want to make sure we're within the posting kind of description here. And we'll know a lot more, in the next 2 months. But ultimately, what we don't know is how the federal government CARES package will come down to the school district, right? We're still waiting to hear from the state about how that money is going to be allocated, what it can be used for. We don't know what kind of assistance we might get from FEMA. So there's still a lot of open questions. But even with some of that money kind of coming our way, we could very well be looking at needing to use some of our fund balance this year to fund the kind of ongoing expenses that were otherwise unbudgeted. We, of course, will also have some savings from things that we're not doing this year, but that, boy, do we all wish we were. So all of that has to flush its way out a little bit. But it may be that we're going to have to dip a little bit into our fund balance at the end of the year. I expect that we'll still be well within board policy limits by the end of the year. But what that might mean for next year is that we're going to have to be really careful with our budgeting. We're going to have to make sure that we're really holding tight to the things that we expected to expend. Because what's probably going to happen next year is a lot of the there's going to be pent-up demand from the things that are not being purchased this year right now are probably not going away, because they're probably things that our students and families still need. And so you'll probably see high amounts of funding early next year, which normally would not happen for us, right? And so you'll end up with like more need for next year in 2021 because the purchases didn't happen in this year. So very few things will be savings forever. Our utility bill, we'll probably be saving on some lighting costs and maybe some AC in May or June. But those are really kind of the only examples of things that would not likely otherwise come back. So that's what we're going to have to be planning for in this multi-year budget, is what are the things that are frankly just getting pushed off to next year that we're going to have to fund, that and the things that we also had anticipated doing for next year.
Okay, Nikki, I see you. We'll cut to you next. I got a couple more questions. So do you have just a sense of order of magnitude even in terms of how we would dip into fund balance? And if no, it's okay.
No, not yet. We'll
Okay.
get there. I need probably another month to figure out exactly. I really need to find out where we're getting from the budget.
Okay. And then just to speak to the questions around strategic equity projects and this $1 million, if we look at the base budget that you've built out, is that $1 million that we've saved via healthcare, is that already built into that budget? So is that essentially the same? I'm trying to get a sense of as we're talking about the BHS and micro schools, is that if we go forward with those things as part of our non-passing or our base budget, is that spending that $1 million?
Yes.
Okay.
So the only revenue, so I mean, it's essentially revenue authority that has been freed up, right? So if you were to add more strategic equity projects, it draws down that $1 million at this point. If the $1 million wasn't there, we frankly wouldn't even really be able to have these conversations about anymore. Armando is on the line to talk about BHS. I don't know if
I actually don't think thank you, Armando, for being here. I am I mean, I'm a big believer in BHS, and I hope it comes back to this board for more discussion with some of the data that you've been able to share previously. From my perspective right now, I think we need to be more conservative around what we choose to go forward with, at least in this month. And so while both micro schools and BHS are, I believe, absolutely the right things to move forward with, I don't feel comfortable making that choice right now, just given the level of uncertainty that we have with the state budget in particular going into next year. And so I also won't be a vote on this board to make that decision, but I do want to just throw that out there that I've heard a couple of folks mention support for those things, and also support for not spending the $1 million. And I just want to make sure we're able to clarify from kind of the sitting board that will move forward. You know, do we want to reserve that authority for either these same uses at a later date, or do we want to make the decision now and not reserve that authority?
Yeah, the reason why I wanted to call out BHS, I just want to be extra clear that we probably, again, we funded the schools that we expected to fund. But after this month, we probably lose any opportunity versus the other two, which could probably be talked June, well into June.
Yeah, and as much as it pains me to say it, I think Armando is going to keep going slow and with excellent quality of execution. I at least from my perspective, I don't think we can push to expand it right now. So let me maybe flip it back out. I know Gloria hasn't weighed in if you want to, and then anyone that wanted to make any final comments before we move forward. And Kelly, if you have questions to make sure we've got clarity from the board.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. In agreement with everything that's been discussed today, I think where I'm at is for us to continue to look at our current and assess what we currently spend and analyze it through an equity lens. And I really like the direction of our security assistance. That is exactly where I want us to continue to go. And so I'm really happy. It's, we're making these smaller increments. We're looking at these areas through a equity lens, alongside investing in our strategic equity projects, right? I think it is really looking at throughout our organization and what we budget for, and make sure that everything that we are investing in is through that equity lens and assessment. And it sounds like, I'm really happy in the direction that we're heading. And I mean, I agree. I mean, I think to spend that extra million, I think right now, I don't see us, because I'm not comfortable designating that amount in this time of uncertainty. And I mean, I was thinking differently 2-3 months ago, but I have changed, and sort of, I think we are not in a space right now where we can look at where we want to invest this. But I do think that as we continue these budget constraints today and into the future, that we have an opportunity to assess our entire organization on what we currently invest in, and make sure that we are making those decisions of where do we take money from in areas that does not meet our equity strategies. And so that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Gloria. Nikki, did you want to weigh in? And then I'd like to move us on. Nikki, you're on mute.
Does this mean that the equity projects on environmentalism on the referendum will be scrapped as well?
So No, not this discussion. So we'll move to kind of the referendum kind of scope in just a minute. But nothing is being scrapped from kind of this current conversation. Maybe if I can summarize, Kate, what I think I'm hearing is that we'll work to implement the SSA into the base budget. And to Gloria's point, I'm going to spend the next 2 minutes relooking, rescrubbing this base budget for everything we can get out of it. And if I can keep that $1 million whole and get the $160,000 in for the SSAs and do both, that's kind of the work I'm hearing is important for this board right now. As it relates to the BHS, we're going to kind of leave it as is and let Armando start working, at least in the April draft that we released to the public. We can always get feedback on that, but that's kind of what I'm hearing thus far. And on the micro schools, this is a conversation that we can continue to bring back, frankly, all the way till October. Paris has what he needs to get started. And when things start to shift and we get more information, maybe we'll be able to move back to some of our original thinking too. So hearing take a cautious kind of stance right now as more data comes in. And that's probably a good segue, Kate, I think, to the referendum, if that works for you.
Yep.
Okay. Barb, if you could pull the slides back up for me. And why don't you just move to our timeline slide, which is the second to last slide here. There you go. Keep going. You can actually go to the next slide. I'll cover the other one. All right. So what is in front of you right? Nope. There you go. What is in front of you right now is the referendum timeline slide that we've been showing really since these conversations started last September. Where we left the March operation work group when we were kind of in person together, we were working on trying to hone the scope in to get ready for your vote, which we thought would happen at the end of March. As a quick reminder on that scope, we had left that meeting looking at a potential facilities capital referendum at $317 million. That then included the major renovations for our 4 high schools. It included our elementary school strategy for the South Side, our Capitol High strategy, and it included $2 million really targeted investments with strong return on investments and with environmental sustainability projects. That remains kind of like the current potential thinking about the plan, but I know a lot has changed since then. And on the operating side, we had left that meeting really talking about potentially going to referenda to ask for $6 million of reoccurring authority in the 2021 budget, $8 million to 21-22, $9 million for 22-23, and $10 million for 23-24, cumulative of $33 million by the time the full operating cycle were to be completed, and if the board used all of that referendum authority. So that's kind of where we ended March as far as looking at the needs of the district going forward and the constraints that the state was giving us in our budgets and our estimates. As it relates to need, the need hasn't changed any, and as a matter of fact, the need could very well increase based on what the state might do with a state budget repair bill. We might see a 2021 worse than we had predicted. And we might see 21-22 continue to be impacted if the state's revenues aren't catching up to their budget estimates either. So there's a lot more unknowns than we even had in March. And I think what we're going to see out of the next couple months is more information and more data coming our way. And that's largely going to be dependent on when we all can get back to school and when we all can get back to work and whatever the new normal is. And I know Ananda's already commented on our school districts on a new normal might very well be different next year. And we're having those conversations as well amongst our senior leadership team. So, I'll hand this over to the board, but I just want to make sure everyone is aware, we understand and know the changing economic environment around us. We also know that we don't know a lot yet. I think a lot of data is going to come in. This board does not need to vote until August. So we have a pretty good runway ahead of us. And I think that's really working in our favor right now. which is that the only reason we were voting early was kind of for our strategy at the time. That strategy might be changing. So Kate, I'll let you kind of run this part of the conversation. I think that's what I got.
Yeah, no, Kelly, thank you for that. That's a good preamble. I think, we wanted to just have a short discussion now, mostly with respect to timeline. We had a timeline discussion probably 5 months ago where we had all agreed to vote early to fuel some of the work over the summer and before schools let out. And obviously the world around us has changed since then. And so we're not looking right now for feedback necessarily on numbers or any of that, but really on process from now until August and how this board wants to approach decision making. So I'll leave it at that maybe, and then open it up to the floor. Gloria.
Yeah, Kelly, thank you really for making this, quick adjustment for us. I mean, I agree. I think given where we're at, I think October or August, right? We can evaluate along the way, right? And if we have until August, let's wait until August and let's just assess on the changes here. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen in May, and we have June. So I appreciate that we did try to, get this vote in early so that we could do our community engagement work as a board. But I think we just wait and evaluate as we move along. I think this is it's time to, it's okay to pivot during this crisis. And Kelly, I appreciate all your work in adjusting and your staff around this decision.
Thanks, Gloria. Ananda?
Yeah, I just want to elevate. I think what the board president Gloria said it's right on point. We really worked really hard and along with our team to set us up to be in a much better place in regards, in particular, to staff compensation. We talked so much about it for the past year since some of us took office. We've been talking about making sure that staff compensation is not a place where people are uncertain and despite our efforts, we are in the space of being worried about what's going to happen. And at this time, it's less about our sentiment or our willingness to make sure that folks have guarantees with their salaries, and it's more to do what's happening globally and in our states and in our community. So I just wanted to say, I really appreciate your team's work around this and making sure that we were previewing as much as possible. And I hope our community understands that, at this point, it's impossible for us to make a hard on this, or steady or hard decision or make a finalized decision given the landscape that we're navigating. I just wanted to comment on one thing around what Leah's updates. I appreciate, Leah, you giving a full interpretation of how you are seeing the work and giving us an update. I just wanted to kind of as a follow-up to think about how are we addressing unintended consequences in that on that equity decision. Is there going to be some surveys to the security staff? Is there a way of focus groups? Are there ways, to kind of make sure that what we have proposed moving forward is not going to end up being something that's going to negatively impact the staff? So thank you all for that work, and thank you, Kate, for the opportunity.
Thanks, Ananda. Savian?
Yeah, I think moving forward with caution and an observant eye on new data as it comes in with regard to the referendums to see how it impacts our size and scope of the ask or potential ask, and how pandemic affects the local economy is really important for us to consider. So
You just muted yourself, Savian.
Sorry. So yeah, essentially in agreement with Gloria's comments there.
Thank you. Chris?
I want to echo what others have said. I think we need to maintain flexibility in making this decision into the summer. We have till August. We should use that time because there's so many unknowns. Kelly, I really appreciate the work that you're doing to maybe redefine some of the assumptions that have been made in figuring out the tax impact of the two referenda. We know those assumptions are changing right now. So I look forward to getting new data, and that will help inform a decision later on down the road. I also just want to point out that even though we're in an economically much more difficult time than we anticipated being just a month ago, we're also in a time when I think a lot more people in our community are highly aware of how important our public schools are to keeping our community functioning. We've seen the impact that closing public schools has at every level, whether it's the household level or the community level or the level of social services provisioning in our community. And so I think we have to keep in mind as we move into making decisions about the referendum that yes, we're looking at economically perhaps more challenging times, but we're also looking at an acknowledgement, hopefully on the part of the whole community, that our public schools are absolutely central to our being able to cope with uncertainty in our community and make our decisions about investing in our schools from that perspective as well.
Real quick, Chris mentioned, some of the moving parts, and just for transparency, the pieces that we'll be paying close attention to are the overall tax base here in Madison. We've been seeing 8%, 7% growth kind of year after year. And we had already been anticipating that to slow down a bit. So we'll be watching where that kind of starts to slow down to and at what pace. We can update our assumptions as we move on forward into the future if we need to there. But we've also have interest rates baked into that facility, operating facility budget. And as interest rates right now are really, really low, kind of our assumptions around interest rates might actually be too high right now. So there'll be all kinds of moving pieces, and some will move in our favor and some won't. So as we get closer and know more, those are the things that we'll start to kind of recalculate.
Kelly, I'm going to jump in. This is, I think, not the time to be making significant and multi-year decisions about our citizens' tax bill. In particular for the operating referendum, where we have a lot of unknowns about what our funding sources are going to look like next year from a state perspective. I guess I kind of think about these two questions separately. And I think we have a lot of unknowns on the operating referendum side in terms of need and in terms of our citizens' ability to bake in a higher tax bill for forever, right? Because that's what the operating referendum does. I think for the facilities referendum, it's a little bit different, and I wonder if making a vote earlier on the facilities referendum could make sense, given that interest rates are so low, and given that our city, the construction resources in our city might be highly available, and that we could actually move forward with more work in the interim with our construction manager partner if we were able to make that decision a little bit earlier. And I'm not suggesting this month by any means, but I do wonder if separating the two decisions could be a possibility, given that we have work that can be done over the summer, and that the city certainly could use a infusion of work for construction resources, et cetera. So, this would be a good time financially to fund a facilities bond. So it's just a thought to throw out there in terms of how you want to think about it moving forward, if you want to vote on them at two separate times. Otherwise, I fully agree with everything that's been said. Ali, did you want to jump in?
Thanks, Kate. I appreciate
your thoughts and also the really thoughtful feedback of my board colleagues. I think it's tempting to just want to be decisive in terms of leadership right now because people want to know what's going on and be oriented. And I think the best thing we can do as leaders is really say that we're going to examine, you know, the reality of our situation as it unfolds, which, given all of the work that you all have done, is pretty heartbreaking at this kind of, you know, kind of like the last couple of minutes of the game. And it feels intense to try to shift the timeline. And it also feels intense to understand what are the cues moving forward that will inform our decision, because we had put so much work into this going up to this point and had conversations that were based in real information and real data, that no longer seems to necessarily indicate where we're going to end up. So I agree that I think our ability to pause right now and look to August and look to kind of the full opportunity of this summer and how we're going to use that to inform this decision is really relevant. I think in terms of looking at both referendums, I think that there's definitely a need to think about all of our options in terms of navigating them.
Okay, I think that is good input for Kelly and for everybody moving forward, to absorb more information as our situation unfolds and continue to have this discussion probably on a monthly basis for the next few months.
Right. So I'm hearing my immediate takeaways are we'll take the board off the April agenda. Clearly, we're not headed there in 2 weeks. And that I'm hearing Kate, Gloria, that we'll kind of keep a touch base on our referendum conversation for the May operation work group, and probably potentially again for the June operation work group, like a touch point. And as more data comes available, we'll obviously be sharing updated statistics. That's what I'm hearing is our team takeaway.
Sounds good. All right, thank you, Kelly. So that concludes. Kelly, do you have any more questions or do you need anything else from us with respect to budget and referendum?
Yeah, the only other piece is I want to make sure I'm not making an assumption and that it's understood, is that we would not be releasing what we had earlier termed as a passing budget in 2 weeks. And that instead, we're kind of holding that until we have this broader idea of scope of what that might be, and that we would release that potential passing referendum budget along that same timeline of when the board starts to narrow on what the potential referendum, if any, is. I just want to make sure I'm not just taking that away, that is a clear direction. Gloria's shaking her head, yes.
I think nodding heads, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, thanks, Kelly. So let's move on. We have 2 other shorter items on the agenda for tonight. The next one is a policy update that maybe Kelly and Sherry, if she's on, yep, I see, can speak to briefly and take any questions if the board has any.
Yeah, so I'll just start off and then Sherry will surely jump in here. So board policy 6244 is our procurement policy. It's the policy that drives not only our consent agenda limits, it drives the level of authority that our principals have. It drives the level of authority that we would require our more stringent procurement processes to really check in. And it's super important that we analyze this policy on a more reoccurring basis, because as inflation starts to go, this policy can start to really move away from reality if we're not updating it on a more frequent basis. So attached to the board docs, just for a kind of a piece of evidence, I attached a letter that we receive, and we received this one quite a few years ago now, from the Office of Management and Budget from the federal standpoint, telling us to increase our procurement policies for their money from $3,500 up to $10,000. And so that's a change we haven't made in policy. Our policy still states the $3,000 threshold. So using that to kind of as a piece of evidence for where the overall procurement policy kind of should shift, and also using benchmarking with our other districts. We have in front of you a proposal to move the consent agenda limit from $20,000 to $40,000, to move our stringent procurement, which is the one that requires that you go to a large RFP process, which is very time consuming for our staff, from the current $3,000 limit to $10,000, and that's the one that's fully supported with the federal guidance that I've attached to this document. And then moving our principal threshold, which is largely where their discretionary funds can be spent without a ton of oversight from my office, from $1,000 to $2,000. So all of that is meant to kind of mirror this evidence that we have from the federal government heading in the same direction. I know I've had multiple conversations with individuals about time-consuming nature. Not only that this takes of your board meetings and of your time, but the time-consuming nature this takes of everyone in my office, Lisa's office, Chad's office, Barb, Melissa, and others that touch all these items along the way. As we talk about starting to become more efficient and more effective with our resources, these are the kind of policies that we're talking about, that if they don't move with the times, continue to become more and more inefficient on the overall structure. So I'll leave it at that. And if Sherry wants to, I think, jump in here for a minute or two, she can.
So when I first started at the district, as Kelly said, this is one of those policies that makes it very difficult to handle the contracting role in the legal department. And with this policy, we will be able to more efficiently move contracts through so that we are actually following the policy and getting contracts out to our vendors completely signed, which means signed by Kelly before any work begins. With the $10,000, I will once again go ahead and redraft some of our templates to ensure that any policy that falls within that does have all the requirements that the district has deemed necessary. And so there really shouldn't be any concern with raising this limit, because as I said, most of these will be district templated contracts that will just need to be signed by our vendors. And if they have questions or any changes, of course, that always goes through the legal department.
Thanks, Sherry. Nikki, do you want to jump in?
One statement, one question. On the statement, as we are in a crisis currently, and financial, emotional, disease crisis, I don't think we should be expanding our purchasing power. I think the optics personally look bad. That's my personal opinion. But my question is, why are we starting with a policy that was last updated in 2016 when we have other policies that haven't been updated since 1984? Just curious, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we always, Nikki, look at all the policies with our Operation Work Group Chair. It's part of the Operation Work Group Chair role. And as we build out kind of the calendar, and this was one of the policies we worked with Kate to elevate this year. And I mentioned earlier, you can't let these kind of policies go outdated, because the cost of everything that we do changes every year just through inflation and all the federal policies and regulations. This really should be one that we look at every 2 years, but plenty of other policies can hold a 4 or 5 year cycle.
Ali, and then Gloria, you next.
Yeah, so with all due respect to your comments, Nikki, because I think they're relevant, and I think people, especially in this moment, want a sense of transparency around how we're navigating resources. I think of some of the things that have been brought to the board's attention via consent agenda, things like petite bananas, things that maybe are not the greatest utilization of our time as a body of governance. and also don't promote the decision-making or leadership of our administrative team. I'm curious around, I think it's very easy to go from $1,000 to $2,000 in spending for a principal. I think that's a very reasonable kind of double. I think 20,000 to 40,000 is a different variety of double. And so Kelly, what are some of the things that we would see taken off of our consent agenda, including recurring items that would no longer need the board to act as decision makers on?
Yeah, so Chad probably has a good number of the examples. The amount of time that Chad Weezy's team has to spend in consent items has been a reoccurring kind of challenge. So Chad can probably jump in with some of the examples that maybe drive him crazy. But you'll see things like when we need to buy some furniture for a classroom, for example, just pick over the $20,000 mark. Yeah, I know, Lisa, if you have some good examples in here too. But definitely you got the petite bananas, we have the fruit, the vegetables, all kinds of things that some will still fall over this threshold because we purchase in bulk. But I suspect that maybe about 25% of the items kind of fall in this category and are kind of just more time consuming to get them ready for you than are actually worthwhile of being on the board meeting. I don't know, Chad, Lisa, do you have any good examples on your mind?
Hi, Kelly. Other things that come to mind, simple requests like repaving parking lots. There are on occasion playgrounds that fall between $20,000 and $40,000. The board's approved a number of requests for buying a pickup truck to refresh our fleet, that we're using the same procurement methods every time to buy that truck, but inevitably have to go through the process of typing up the memo and having the board approve it. So tons of things cross our desk that end up in that kind of that bubble. And many times we're using the same procurement methods, but have the added layer of administration to just get the purchase approved. Lots of times it takes us another 3 weeks to sometimes 6 weeks if we miss the board deadline to get it on the consent agenda.
I would just add that Chad, you said something that made me think it can really slow down the system, particularly if it's something related to classroom materials or teaching or instructional materials or materials for professional development. And then I would agree, Chad, I think some of the going out to bid on certain things at a very small amount can also really hamper the process moving forward.
Correct. Yeah, it many times can get in the way of us being, at least in my world, having the ability to be responsive to schools. If we miss a procurement deadline, sometimes then to get contracts lined up and have all the work lined up for the summer, if there's any hang up with the bidding process on some of these smaller purchases, we can miss a full month of work that can be essential. We try to do stuff sometimes during breaks or during the summer, and the procurement policy can on occasion get us caught up.
Thanks, yeah, Chad. So the other portion of that question, thank you so much, Lisa, Chad, and Kelly for answering, is how do we communicate around those purchases with the community without that becoming, and a large part of the consent agenda, because the consent agenda is usually extensive, goes undiscussed at board meetings anyway. So I'm not saying that we would be having an expansive conversation. It's more so what do checks and balances look like? And Kelly, specifically for you, were we to bring that number down to 33,000, what would the impact on the consent agenda be if it was a slightly lesser increase? And 33,000 is a hypothetical number.
Yeah. So, I mean, if it were to come down from there, you're looking at probably, kind of 20% saved instead of 25% saved or something like that in that fashion. Ellie, what was your first question though? I just forgot the answer I wanted to give you.
My first question was about transparency. And again, I'm like, we don't have expansive questions about the majority of issues, but still, how do we make sure folks have a real sense of how resources are being utilized within the district?
Yeah, so thank you. What I wanted to say is we produce a check registry as part of the every single board meeting, which is every single thing we buy. It's been on kind of a to-do list that I haven't yet gotten to in this role, but I do have a vision of finding a better way to kind of produce and publish the check registry. So maybe it was a little easier to read, understand, sort. So that is on a to-do list of
Hey,
mine.
Nikki. Hey, Nikki,
Yeah.
I think, could you mute?
Sorry, trying to figure this out.
Thanks.
So I hope that helps.
Sorry, folks. Gloria,
I'll pass.
any other comments? Chris?
So thank you so much for your work on this. I think, this policy change for me is about trying to navigate the tension between providing the community transparency on how this district spends money and also not micromanaging or politicizing the small stuff. And I'm comfortable with giving principals more discretion, like the 1,000 increase to $2,000. I don't have an issue with it all. Looking at implementing the federal guidance on micro purchasing thresholds, which would basically be taking the $3,000 limit right now for going out to bid and raising that to $10,000. I see pros and cons to doing that. And one of the biggest pros I see actually has to do with food service, which has come up at this point. And I don't know if somebody here could speak to this, but I know that in the process, the process of trying to purchase food that's local versus trying to purchase food through Costco, that bid level makes a difference. When you're looking at $3,000, that's only $3,000 of food you can buy without going out to bid, where Costco is going up against a local farmer. Raising that to $10,000 could actually give our local sustainable farmers more of a chance to be able to sell into MMSD. And I wondered if somebody could speak to the impact that could have on food purchasing in the district and achieving our sustainability goals.
Well, I'll see if Chad wants to jump in on the food service part, but I'll push on your example even further, Chris. I think that's a strong point, and I think it's a point well beyond food service. I think that would relate to a lot of things. Local funding that we might do with our nonprofit partners, local vendors that provide services to us on a more smaller local scale that might be $4,000 or $5,000. I don't know, there's printing that we do or assistance with other things that could keep it more local versus needing to go out to a big national RFP for something like that, where you do get kind of the bigger kind of groups competing against smaller. So I think it's well beyond a food service example and probably in a lot of things we do.
I do still feel some concern about the possibility of, particularly with consultants, giving preferential treatment to certain consultants without that being a transparent decision. But I think it's possible that the benefits in being able to work with more small local vendors, particularly for me, food vendors, and trying to achieve our sustainability goals could outweigh that. When it comes to raising the threshold for bringing stuff to a board vote, I'm really uncomfortable with $40,000. The last time we changed this was, I think, 2016. I think at that time, and correct me if I'm wrong, we were at $15,000 and there was a proposal on the table to go to 25, and the board, I think, only was willing to go to 20 at that point in time.
Yeah, I was on that team. The original proposal was 35 and the board via operations work group brought it down to 25. And then the board in the regular board meeting voted it from 25 down to 20. So all the evidence and research at the time supported 35. And that is the number that we have since then updated to 40 based on inflation.
Given that that's pretty much doubling, I'm not comfortable with that. I could see talking about 25 or 30, but I am not comfortable with 40. So I want to just put that one out there. I just think it's too big of a jump and too much of a loss of transparency to our community in one policy change. I'm also not very comfortable with including all of our curricular and learning materials in this. I get the saving of staff time, and I do value that. And at the same time, that list of curricular purchases that comes out each month, for people who are paying attention, is our community's way of knowing what's being taught in our schools without having to like dig through the check register and try to find every book that we're buying. And I think it's important that our community know what we're teaching. So for that reason, I would discourage including the curricular materials purchases in this, because I want to make sure that people know what books are in our schools. So do I have anything else? Nope, I think that does it. Thanks.
I'm gonna maybe jump in. I guess I just want to remind us all that we do approve all of these expenditures because we approve the budget. And so we're working with upwards of $400 million that we approve to a very granular level that Kelly shares with us via a budget book. And what I hear from several comments is around communication and transparency, which is different than oversight. Our job isn't to pick the $22,000 curriculum that is going to be used in one specific class. And so if there's a need for a communication mechanism around particular topics, I think we could introduce a line in this policy that says that, and that says, you know, the board doesn't need decision-making or oversight at the $25,000 level or the $35,000 level, but we do want communication of every purchase made that's curricular in nature or whatever. I mean, I think all of those things are within our control if we want to have that discussion. But there is oversight of the spend in the sense that we approve the budget with line items that Kelly cannot change later once it's in a specific budget. It can't, I mean, some of them probably can be, but they can't easily be moved across. So we do have a decision point that's built in that then facilitates kind of people doing their jobs through the year. So anyways, I support moving this. I think just inflation alone over time, this needs to get continually updated. And I would support moving it to the levels proposed. Ananda.
So I am in support of making some adjustment. I don't know if the 40,000 is the amount that we should go with. But there's another question that I'm hearing about, like, how do we get, you know, updates around particular things, right? And in one way that we do that is through the consent agenda. And so I'm thinking that maybe some of those things get elevated to either the instructional group or the operation work group as an update and a recommendation for changes and conversations about support and adoption or not, versus having each time coming to the agenda. I'm just curious if you had mentioned that the next two items were quick, and they're like, this is not a quick conversation. So I think that you're trying to get some consensus, which it does not seem to be happening. But I'm also curious that since now that the staff got a chance to hear, what some of the concerns that we can kind of figure out some other creative ways to continue to have some sort of updates on, in particular items like the materials, instructional materials and things like that, versus other items. But in the same time, those other items, there's a different level of scrutiny. Like, for example, Chris mentioned, which I support, is the produce and how do we, continue to support the farm to school program. So yeah, I'm just curious that, if maybe this is a good pause to give the staff an opportunity to sort of just go back and kind of think through some other ways that we can address that and not be voting on Chiquita bananas.
I'm sure Lisa has something to say here too, so I'll pause in a minute. But I think the takeaway of what I just heard is spot on how I feel, which is that the consent agenda item is not in a time for updates to the board. And oftentimes what we're seeing is somebody to pull something because they have a curiosity of something that's ancillary or somewhat tangential to the item. And the consent agenda is nowhere near designed for that part of the process. And it's part of the problem that we have with the consent agenda items being so low. So the instruction work group and the operation work group are designed to do work. And when there's work to be done, that's where we should do it. If the board members have a curiosity, that is the reason why we're supposed to have one-to-ones. There's curiosities are supposed to come up in those meetings so we can talk through with individual people and individual items that individuals have questions about. And I think that's where we're getting a little mixed up. Jane, I know has something to say.
So Kelly, do you have enough information at this point though to kind of hone in on what you would like to put forward, or?
I'll leave it to Jane here. My personal opinion is we'll put forward the policy as we recommend it, and the board can amend it as needed.
Jane, were you gonna?
Yeah, I was just going to remind us of the really level leadership that we need from the board. You have really outstanding and excellent leaders, and I have never come to appreciate it any more than I do right now. So I think this is a small elevation that will help us do our work better. We will be as transparent with you as we have been and will try to be, and answer all your questions ahead of time. We can move and elevate things into a work group, but I think this way of working is really just something that we need as an administration.
Thanks, Jane. Okay, I'm going to propose that we move forward.
Trying to get this to work.
Nikki, you are unmuted. Yep, perfect. Sherry, do you want to give any preamble to the Badger Rock contract that is in the materials?
So with the Badger Rock contract, the changes that I have made are in line with what was voted on, which was the 5-year term, but also it includes those items that the Badger Rock community were seeking waivers for. So you will see within the policy, within the contract, that we've added in the waivers that administration agreed would be acceptable to us. There is one area of question, and that is with regard to when the board would like to see Badger Rock have their 120 students in place. In the prior contract, it was the middle year. So it was a 3-year contract. So in the second year, the administration wanted to see the 120 student cap reached. So that would be the only question that's open in the contract. I have not heard from Badger Rock's council on any additions or changes that they're proposing at this time.
All right, with that, let's open it up.
I just want to declare that I have a conflict of interest, so I'm withdrawing from this conversation.
Thank you. Any input on the proposed contract? Nikki? You're on mute now, Nikki.
Working on it. Sorry, had some computer technical difficulties, so I'm on my phone. But my quick question is, how many are being used for CC teachers for special ed? And as long as needs are met, the school thinks they could meet them, I'm fine. I just want to make sure that we're following all guidelines.
As far as staffing, Nikki, it is in line with typical staffing for MMSD middle schools, if that's what you're asking.
That's exactly what I was asking. And thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Any other input? All right, I think that with that, we'll move forward. Sherry, did you need a specific answer on your year of implementation question, or is?
I was thinking the same thing, so I would put it in, because it's 5 years, I'd have it at the beginning of the 3rd year to kind of be in line with what the prior contract was.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you for your work on that.
Kate, you're muted.
I know I just realized that. There's only one more part of the agenda, and it's a little bit awkward. So Gloria, do you want to pick this up?
Yeah, I'll pick this up. So I really don't want to, but I guess I have to. So it's the resolution recognizing the departing board member, Kate Teves. So I'll read it and then I'll make some comments after that. And then we'll open it up for others to comment. So here's the resolution. Whereas Kate Teves, Board of Education member for the Madison Metropolitan School District, has successfully served on the board since 2017 as treasurer for 2 years and vice president for 1 year during a 3-year term. Whereas Kate has advocated for teachers, teacher retention strategies, and diversity and inclusion policies and programs that better serve students, families, and staff of color. Whereas Kate has been instrumental in the development of the critical planning efforts attached to the current referendum strategies for November 2020. Whereas Kate's financial experience complemented her work while serving as chairperson on the Board of Education's operations work group that focuses on financial management, including budget planning. Whereas Kate's voice as a change agent supporting innovation and a willingness to pilot new things has provided enthusiasm and optimism for the future. Now, therefore, it be resolved that the Madison Metropolitan School District Board of Education recognizes and greatly values Kate Teves' contributions and dedication to MMSD schools. Her work will continue to have a lasting positive impact in our schools and for our students, our families, and the community. Be it further resolved that this statement be permanently imprinted in the Board of Education minutes for the meeting of April 13, 2020.
Thank you, Gloria.
So yay.
Okay.
Yeah, Kate, thank you so much. I mean, this is, the moment that you shared with me that you were not going to run again, I was literally in tears.
I was just going to say, don't make me cry again, Gloria.
You have been my rock since the beginning, when I first met you. And we met during my, when I was considering running for Madison School Board, and you have supported me, given me so much knowledge and experience, but mainly you were just the person always by my side saying, you can do this. And despite all the challenges of running a campaign, and when I felt that no one supported my candidacy, when I was alone, you were always by my side. Never did I think that I would win a campaign against a really good incumbent, and to serve alongside you is just been a privilege. And then when I became the president of the school board, you just have, I've learned so much from you. You have been my mentor. You have been so solid in all these critical decisions and crisis situations that we have been a part of together. When I was in panic mode, sometimes calling you, you'd be like, it's okay. We got this. You got this. Those are the words that I heard from you constantly throughout my term. And you have added so much to this school board, a balanced approach, very compassionate in your decisions and very thoughtful, very strategic. And I just, this is a big loss. It's a big loss for the board. It's a big loss for our community. And selfishly, it's a big loss for me. And, but I know that you will continue to do great things and you will continue to be involved I know your number, so don't change it. So anyways, I just really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your leadership and your support over the years. I truly am grateful to you, Kate. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gloria. You made me cry again, so.
Okay, who wants to go next? Ali?
Yeah, Kate, it's been an honor to get to serve with you and to get to know you over the course of the last few years. And we met very differently than you and Gloria. And I think one of the things I heard when I ran for the first time and lost to you was that people would vote for all three of the women who were voting in that primary. And here we all are together. And so Madison is a very honest community. They said it and they meant it. I think working with you as a board member has been an incredible learning experience. And I think the resolve and level of attention to detail you bring to this work is something that's impossible not to admire. But I also think one of the most profound moments I have had in knowing you was in losing to you and coming to the board meeting to participate in public comment after losing to you. And there's this kind of sinking feeling of how awkward that is to not be in the position to make the decision and to be asking your former rival to make a decision in the interest of a community you really care about. And you listened to what I had to say and you prioritized the needs of LGBTQ youth, and you assured me that losing to you did not mean that the young people I care so much about weren't going to be stood up for on the board. And that meant more to me than you'll ever know. So I wish you nothing but success. Thank you for serving. And we're excited to see what you do next.
Thank you.
Krista,
yeah, I wanted to echo everything that's been said. Thank you so much, Kate. And I also wanted to add that I really believe one of the great things you have brought to this board is a very productive balance between idealism and pragmatism that helps us get stuff done. And I really hope that even in your absence, we can continue to be both idealists and practical as we move forward in the many decisions that face us. So thank you for contributing that to the culture of this board. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris.
Ananda?
Yeah, I appreciate Ali and Chris going before me because I also met you in that race and I was supporting Ali at that time. So it is, it is complicated, but I'm so glad to get to serve with you this last year. And I've learned a lot from you too, and the mannerism, how you handle yourself in meetings and how you bring things to the conversation and how you have managed our staff as well. So I really appreciate this last 3 years of you serving and just the ability to have learned from you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Nikki?
Yes, Kate, and Jewish, we don't say goodbye. It's considered bad luck. So I'm going to say I wish you the best in L'Chaim to life. I wish you the best. You're going to do great. And I expect great things from you. It's been a pleasure and an honor to serve with you.
Thank you, Nikki.
Savion?
Yeah, just really appreciative of your mentorship and advice and guidance and just rock steady leadership since joining the board. You've given me some of the best advice I've gotten being a member of this body, and we'll certainly miss your leadership and perspective and ability to keep a level head through chaos. And we'll really miss being your colleague, but looking forward to our friendship and for the future.
Thank you, Savion.
Anika?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for all your work and leadership and dedication to students. And I've just really appreciated the opportunity to learn from you this year.
Thanks, Anika.
Thank you. All right, Jane? Jane?
So Kate, people don't often realize what a commitment it is to our community for someone to serve on the school board. I see the work that you have put into this board and into this community, the decisions you make on behalf of our community, our students, our families. And I just want you to know I have appreciated your compassion as well as your competency. So thank you so much. And I'm really fortunate that I got to serve this year with you.
Thank you, Jane. I feel the same way. Oh my gosh, you guys, I didn't expect this. And especially in this format, it's kind of intense. So I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get out everything I wanted to. But it has been a privilege to do this over the last 3 years. And more than anything, it's been a privilege to do it with you. I'm now just a citizen, and I'm relying on you guys to keep our schools fantastic. And I know that the love that you each feel for our students and the passion you feel for education is real. I feel it every single time that we are together. And I think this group of people has the power and the insight to make more change, and change that we desperately need, than any other team of people that has sat here. So it has been a privilege to do this with you. We have some really hard decisions ahead of us, some that we were supposed to already make, and some that we weren't. But I am grateful that you are here doing this job. I know that you will continue to invest everything that you have in it. And I look forward to what's ahead. I encourage you to keep being bold. Don't be afraid of having the hard conversations. Our city needs us to have hard conversations. The hard conversations are about race and about instruction and about money and health and safety and love. And I think you are the right people to do that. So thank you. Take care of our kids. So thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
So we're supposed to vote to go into closed session right now, but Gloria, can you read that for me?
I'll go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead. I just, let's do a motion to adjourn. Can I get a motion?
Motion to adjourn. Ananda.
Second.
Second.
Savion, second. Okay. Anika, your advisory vote?
Aye.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we are adjourned, and then now we are going to, just let me open this up here.
We have a 2-minute break.
Hello, what? Excuse me?
Could we have a 2-minute break? I have to quick use the restroom.
Okay, yep, we're gonna go into closed session first, and then we're gonna log off and then go into closed session. So you'll have a few minutes to go and get a break and then come back to closed session, okay?
That's great.
So it is recommended that the Board of Education go into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin State Section 19.85, Parents 1, Parent C, for the purpose of considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of 2 public employees over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility.
So
Second.
Okay, Anika, your advisory vote?
Aye.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. We are in closed session. So in your calendar, there's another link. So we can take a break and then come back in a few minutes. See you in a bit.